Hi students, how are you all? How's the energy? Great? Little low? Yes, I can understand exam tension, fear, anxiety, isn't it? So don't worry, we'll remove this video, will definitely remove all your tensions, fear, anxiety, and will ensure that you will get the confidence to face the exam gracefully and boost up your energy level for sure. So we'll start with the first chapter, that is called exception handling. So before we, we'll just go with the flow, what is there in this slide. So we'll just understand what do you mean by exception handling. Okay, so here, so what exactly you mean by exception? And we'll just divide this entire word exception handling into two parts, that is exception and handling. So what is exception? Exception is basically an error that disturbs the normal flow of execution. What is exception? Exception is an error that disrupts the normal flow of execution. I can also say it is basically a Python object. What? It's basically a Python object that represents an error which contains information like the name of the file where the error has occurred, and then the position where exactly the error has occurred, and the suggestion, the error type, and all the details related to the error will be shown. Okay, what is an exception? It's a Python object that represents an error that gives you all the information related to the type of the error, the file where the error has occurred, the position, the suggestion, how to overcome the error. Okay, that is what you mean by an exception. Now, what do you mean by handling? Handling is basically how do you try to solve that, right? So, how do we handle these errors? What is exception handling? Very simple. Handling of errors is called as an exception handling. So now we'll understand what is the need of exception. What is the need of exception handling? Why do we have to study this chapter called exception handling? Very simple. The definition itself says that exception is that disrupts the normal flow of execution. We don't want it to get what I can tell you. We don't want it to get crashed. We want the normal flow of execution. Rather, I can say that, right? So what is the need of exception handling means? It's basically to have a normal flow of execution, and basically to prevent the program getting crashed, increases the program readability, and also it helps in debugging. So that's why we have to study this chapter called exception handling. Is the point here? So now we have learned what is an exception. What do you mean by exception handling? Handling the errors that occur during the execution of the program is called as an exception handling. Now we have to understand the different types of exceptions and all. Okay, if you have to tell me the definition, the formal definition, okay, if you have to tell me the formal definition of exception handling, it's basically a useful technique that captures the runtime error. It's a useful technique that captures the runtime error and basically gives you a message. It gives you a message, proper message to the user on encountering the error. So what is exception handling? It's a useful technique in capturing the runtime errors and gives you an appropriate message on encountering the error. Then how do we do it? That means basically by adding a block of code. By adding a block of code. By adding a block of code, we can handle the exception very easily. So then we have to say somewhere that, that this is what I'm handling the exception. That means the interpreter need to understand this is basically a code related exception handling. That means we need some certain keywords, right? What are the different keywords that are used? It's basically try. There are certain keywords that basically tells you about the exception handling. That is try. Then we have except block. Then we have an else block. And also we have finally block. These are the keywords that are used for handling the exception. So I think you have a clear idea on exception handling. Clear? So now we'll just go for the next slide. So here in this topic you have types of error. So now you've understood what is exception, exception handling and all. Now we'll understand what is an error. Now we know exception is basically an error only. Exception is basically error only. So what is an error? Error is basically an unwanted condition. Unwanted condition or unwanted situation that arises when we execute the program is called as an error. Okay, the error and exception are basically that that occurs when the program is under the execution. Okay, that basically arises when the program is under the execution. But the severity, how is it different? It basically differed by the severity, originality, and also with respect to the way it is handled. That's how there is a little difference between the error and the exception. Okay, so in this chapter, according to your syllabus, we'll just focus on error. So what is an error? Error is basically an unwanted condition or unwanted situation that arises when we execute a program, Okay, so here normally what we have seen, the different types of errors. So far what we have seen from our first PUC syllabus, we know there is a syntax error, there is a runtime error, there is a logical error. So what is a syntax error? The error that occurs when it violates the grammatical rules of the programming language. That violates the grammatical rules of the programming language is called as a syntax error, and that occurs before the program is executed, before the program runs. It's called as what? It's called as syntax error, or it's also called as compile time error. It's also called as parsing error. So now let's come back to this second error called as a runtime error. Runtime error is what basically the exception. Then syntax error is not an exception, but according to your textbook, syntax error is also considered as an exception only, but exception mainly deals with the runtime errors, not the syntax error, nor the logical errors also. Basically, exception mainly deals with the runtime errors. When the program is executing, whatever the errors that crop, those are called as in runtime errors. Okay, detected during the program execution. Next is what? Logical error. So what is the logical error? Logical error will not give any kind of error. And then how is an error? It will not give you any kind of error, but it will give you inappropriate results, incorrect values, not according to the expectations. Okay, it will give you some incorrect results it will give. So example is what? If you, for example, I want to add sum is equals to a plus b, I wanted to do it, but instead of this I have just multiplied it. Wrong usage of the operator. And I have to assume that sum should be equal to 0. Instead of assuming the sum equals to 0, I have made a different assumption, sum equals to minus 1. I have made sum equals to 1. Some other assumption I have made it. Faulty logic. This leads to logical error, and it is very hard to detect. You should be very thorough with the logic part, only then you will be able to rectify the logical errors. This is the main types of errors that what we have learned so far. Okay, so we'll go for the next thing, that's called built-in exceptions. Okay, built-in exceptions. Exception, you know what is an exception. I told you in the previous slide only. It's basically an error that disrupts the normal flow of execution, especially the runtime errors. Even according to your textbook, you should understand that syntax is also kind of exception only. That's why they've included this also under this. Keep that in the mind. Clear? Now, what is built-in exception? So exception, you know, what is this built-in exception now? Exception is basically classified as built-in exception and also user-defined exceptions. What do you mean by built-in exceptions? Built-in exceptions means commonly occurring errors which are identified by the interpreter. Commonly occurring errors which are identified by the interpreter are called as built-in exceptions. And remember one thing here, it is automatically triggered. On encountering the error, the interpreter automatically triggers these errors. Okay, automatically it gets triggered. Those are called built-in exceptions. We have some user defined also. Let's not go in detail because that is not there for the syllabus. I just told you there are two types of exceptions. Okay, so exceptions, two types, built-in and user defined. We'll go for built-in exceptions. Under built-in exceptions, there are so many built-in exceptions are there. Let's just go one by one. Okay, what is this? We have a syntax error. Syntax error, as I already told you, it's basically that violates the rules of the programming language, is called as a syntax error. And in this case, what do we have? Let's take an example. If we, for example, let's take print. Okay, we're just telling you with respect to the built-in exceptions. Built-in exceptions are commonly occurring exceptions, commonly occurring errors that are defined by the interpreter and they are automatically triggered. Okay, are automatically triggered. Those are called built-in exceptions. What are the different built-in exceptions? So we have a syntax error, value error, IO error. There are so many errors. We'll just go one by one. We'll just go for the syntax error, which violates the grammatical rules of the programming language, or called as syntax error. So what is the example? We'll just take a one example. Okay, that's, we'll take print. So I'm going to take print. Okay, so I'm just going to write its quote here, double quotes. Okay, happiness is within me. Okay, I've just written one statement here. Print happiness is within me. Let's find out. Any error? Definitely it's an error. We have missed the quote here. It's a double quote. We have begun it. Okay, we have started with the double quotes, but have not ended here. So missing of parentheses, missing of double quotes, so missing of colons. Any grammatical violations of the programming language leads to syntax error. Okay, next what we have? We have a value error. So what is value error? When the value, when there is an inappropriate entered for a particular data type, it leads to value error. What is the example? Let's take another example here for the value error. So what's the example? Let's take a equals to, okay, int input, enter value. Okay, and I've entered. Okay, there is a prompt here, enter the value. And what is the value I have entered? I have entered as love all. I've just entered, it has given me the prompt, I've entered as love all, and it is basically a string. So input function, it basically, it's take a string and that will be converted into int. Now this love all should be converted into int. It's basically an integer. String has to be converted into int. It is not possible. This leads to an error called value error. This leads to an error called value error. Now we have an IO error. What is an IO error? If the file cannot be opened, it leads to an IO error. Okay, input output error we call it. Okay, similarly we have an keyboard interrupt raised when the user presses keys like escape that interrupt the program flow. Okay, if you just press from escape, it leads to the keyboard interrupt error. Then we have an import error when the module is missing. For example, we have come up with lot many modules. Math module is there, random module we have pickle module, we have lot many modules is there, no? So if you miss the module name, I want to use in square root, but if you miss that math module only, then definitely it leads to a module error. Then we have a zero division error. So it's raised when dividing the number. So for example, 10 by 0 if I give, definitely it leads to an error called zero division error. Please remember here the spelling. Everywhere it is being highlighted. Every word, the starting letter of every word is being capitalized here. Write it in the same way. Zero division error. Okay, keyboard interrupt, IOE error. Then we have value error, syntax error, EOF error. What is EOF error? End of file. So you've already reached the end of file and you're trying to read something from the file. You've already reached the end of file. There is nothing more to read it. It leads to an error called EOF error. So we have an index error. So index error is basically when it goes out of the sequence. Let's take one list here. List 1, 10, 20, okay, and 30 I have taken. Okay, this is basically a list and we have an index for 10 is what? This is the index is going to be 0, 1 and 2, and I'm trying to access 10 of L of 4. L of 4 is what? There is no 4. I have not stored anything in the index 4. That leads to an index error. Name error. So let's consider they have taken a is equals to int input, enter the value, and now let me consider that this I've removed it. Int is not there. Okay, I've stored love all in the variable a, the string variable a. And you're trying to print b. What is there in b? If not at all define what is b and how you're trying to get the output of trying to print the value of b, there's nothing, you've not defined only. That leads to an error called name error. And we have an indentation error, so let's write one example for the indentation error. So what's the example? So I'm going to take an example. If a is equals to okay, I am positive. Okay, print positive. Very simple. What I have done, I've just taken a variable called a, one string variable I've taken. I'm trying to equate it. I'm going to check whether the value of a is going to be, I'm positive. I'm checking it. I don't know what I've stored before only. Okay, just assume that I've already stored. Okay, I've stored it. If it is so, I have to print this. Okay, I'm positive and print positive here. If it is true, I have to print this positive, then definitely it leads to an error only, because you have to follow the indentation. That's very, very important. It's basically a block here. It's an if block here. This has to be placed here with a spacing. The leading, what is indentation? It's basically the leading white spaces at the beginning of the statement that indicates that this statement belongs to a particular block is called as an indentation. So you have misplaced the indentation here. That leads to an error called indentation. And we have a type error. So what is the type error? Let's consider 4 and you're going to add with 4. Okay, so what is this? 4 is an integer and you're trying to add an integer with a string. It's not possible. Plus is basically an operator. You can add with the numbers. Okay, you can concatenate the strings, not with integer and the string. So it leads an error called type error. And similarly, we have an overflow error. So raised when the result of a calculation exceeds the maximum limit for a numeric types. Okay, for example, I'm going to take a value of a. A is equals to 10 star 1000 or 10,000, something like this. If it reaches, okay, if the particular value of a variable, integer variable, if it exceeds the maximum limit of a particular data type, it leads to an overflow error. You can look at the spelling O capital, E capital. It leads to an error called overflow error. Okay, we'll go for the next. Okay, so we'll come to the next slide, that's rise and assert statement with syntax and example. See, in the previous slide, you've already seen there is a built-in exception. What is built-in exception? The commonly occurring errors that are defined by the interpreter are called as built-in exceptions, right? Automatically triggered. Automatically triggered is one kind of an exceptions, and similarly we can have exceptions which are forcefully triggered, manually triggered. Okay, so the errors which are manually triggered or forcefully triggered using the keywords called rise and assert. Manually errors also can be triggered, exceptions can be triggered. According to our requirement, we have to have some kind of a message to be given to the user. So we can have such kind of exceptions to be created. So we have that, what is that? We have that facility for us to create the errors manually using a keyword called rise and assert. Okay, so use definitely it throws an exception manually. So how do we write it? Very simple. I'm going to write if. Okay, let's take a is equals to int input, enter the value. Okay, int input, enter the value. Enter value. Enter value, and if a is less than 0, rise exception rise exception, age cannot be negative. Age cannot be negative. Okay, very simple. I have just written one statement here. Int a is equals to enter the value, enter the age of a person. Let's consider here. And after taking the value of the age, I'm just checking if the age is less. For age only you can consider. A is less than 0. If it is less than 0, you can clearly say that it's negative. It's negative, you cannot enter the value, right? For example, let's consider that you're trying to register for some particular website, IRCTC website, you're registering and you got stuck up in the middle, like you're trying to give the password, it is not at all accepting, and it is giving you a kind of blank space without any kind of suggestion, suggestion box as such, like what you have to do next. Okay, but in case it clearly says that the password should be of so and so length. Okay, it should be some one specific special character should be used. One character should be a number and one character should be capital. If they clearly send the message, proper message if it is sent, then it is easy for the user itself will be able to handle that error. That's why handling the exception is very, very important. Clear? That can be given. This is manually we have to give. No, it's not built-in exception. If the A is going to be negative, how the user will get to know, how the programmer will get to know, how the interpreter will get to know, it should not be negative. So we have to tell, we have to write it in the program, right? So similarly, if we write A equals to enter into the value, if it's negative, we can just say that rise exception, age cannot be negative. Automatically, this statement will be executed. This statement will be executed. Is the point here? So similarly, this is the syntax, this is the example here. Oops, an exception has occurred. No condition, nothing is there. Simply if I give rise, it will come. No condition, nothing is there. Simply if you give, then also it will come. That is basically to rise or throw an exception manually. Similarly, we have an assert statement here. What is it? Assert statement. Assert statement basically is going to check the condition. It's going to check the condition. If the condition is false, it's going to rise the exception. If the condition is false, it is going to rise the exception. So let's take an example. I'm going to take x is equals to positive vibes. Okay, I'm going to write like this. X is equals to positive vibes. That means it's basically what? It is basically a string being stored in the x. String is being stored in the x. It is not comparing. It is being stored here. And I'm going to check assert x equal to assert x equal to positive vibes. Assert means we'll definitely check the condition. It tests the expression, sorry. It's going to test the expression. The expression says that x equal to positive s, definitely it is positive vibes. It is not going to generate any error. In case, if I write assert x equal to negative vibes, if I write x equal to negative vibes, then it is going to give a error. What kind of error? Assertion error it is going to give. It simply gives an error. It's going to execute, it's going to rise it assertion error only if the expression, it leads to a false. If it is false, this is false, it leads to an error called assertion error. Clear? So we'll just go to the next slide. So now I just told you what is an exception handling, everything I told you. Now now the point is exception handling is basically adding a block of code. Okay, basically to give a proper message or instruction to the user on encountering the error. So how it is given, how you're telling the interpreter, I'm handling the exception here by making use of some keywords, right? So which are the keywords? We have try block, except block, else block, manually block. Try block is what? It's basically an error causing instruction. Error causing instruction, error detection codes, I can tell you. Okay, wherever the error is, it may come. Here you have to remember that in order to handle the exception, the programmer should anticipate. Here error can come. He has to anticipate before only, in advance only. He has to understand that error may crop in here. Then only he'll be able to handle the exception. So he has to anticipate that. Only then he'll be able to handle the exception, right? So here error causing instruction will be written in this try block, and similarly error solution, okay, solving the error, okay, error solution code, I can tell you, error solution code will be written in the except block. And similarly, if there is no error, see, executes if no exception is raised, there's no exception only, and then else block will be executed. Irrespective of whether an exception is there or not, this block will definitely get executed always. And remember, if any error has not been identified, it re-raises the exception also. If you have not addressed, then it is going to re-raise the exception in the final block. Keep that in mind. Clear? Okay, so we have an example here. Let's look at the example also. We'll be able to understand in a better way. So we have written a try block. Try block contains what? Error detection code, error causing instruction. So that means here where the error can arise. Students, it's a very simple chapter. If you can write this example everywhere, you will definitely get the marks. Okay. So what is a simple example they have taken? Just divide by 0 only they have taken. This is 0 division error only they have taken here, and also value error they have taken. Numerator equals to 50. Okay, enter the denominator. If you're trying to divide numerator by denominator, division performs successfully, and in case the denominator you've entered is 0, 0 means automatically the interpreter itself rises it. But you don't want the error message, whatever the interpreter is showing, you want your own customized message to be displayed. Means you can just handle it in the except block. Except 0 division error, denominator is 0 is not allowed. You're clearly telling us denominator don't put 0, no, don't put 0 there. Simple. And for example, you have put enter the denominator. Instead of that, you have entered as you've instead of entering the denominator value as in terms of integer, you have given in terms of what I can tell. Now you have given something as good. You've just given the statement as good. That means it's basically a string. It leads to end value error, only integers to be entered. Okay, and let's consider that you have entered it's 50 and you've entered the denominator as 10 here. So it is not a 0 division error also. It is not an value error also. It definitely comes here. It calculated the value of quotient here. Okay, it calculated the quotient, and you're going to display the value of quotient in the else block. Else block is going to execute when there is no exception. Clear? This will be executed, and irrespective exception is there or not, this will definitely be executed. Final block. Keep that in the mind. Okay. I told you what is an exception handling and need of exception handling also. Exception handling is basically an adding a block of code basically that gives you a message or an instruction to the user to on encountering the error. Okay, on encountering the error to overcome that error. And need of exception handling, basically what I can tell you, it's basically to have a normal flow of execution, to prevent the program getting crashed, and also we can say that it increases the readability of the program and decreases the what I can tell you, that overhead, okay, unwanted messages being given out, that basically it reduces it. Okay, so it can be applicable for both user defined as well as built-in exceptions. Yeah. So